prior to that, what were some of the deficiencies or gaps that you were noticing that you were trying to fill, but maybe just kind of limited?
So as we connected, as I worked with my LA sheriffs and LAPD partners, we kind of sat back and said, okay, what as law enforcement, what aren't we doing right now? And there was some discovery made that there was a couple things. The first is the sheriffs and LAPD both have what they call a MET team, or MEU as LAPD calls it. And I know you're familiar with some of their programs, but that's their mental evaluation team, pairs a police officer, deputy sheriff with a mental health clinician, and they co-respond to mental health calls. And that's their whole job in life.
Not necessarily this veteran related, just all mental health.
Yeah, all mental health calls within the county and the city. And, these are very, what we would characterize as your very much community policing programs. And we slowly came to the conclusion that, hey, this is one thing the VA is not doing. And it was very, very interesting to me that, wow, we're not doing anything like this, and that kind of got me sparked up a little bit to say, hey, this could be impactful, because it was already making an impact in the community. And I said, well, why couldn't we gear something like this toward veterans? So I had as soon as we got back from that Mayor's Challenge Policy Summit, I went to work and really sat down with the bosses and basically leveraged the fact that the Secretary's number one priority is to reduce veteran suicide. This is another tool in that fight.
Welcome to the Transition Drill Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Pantiani. I appreciate you taking the time to watch, so let's get into this. Since you came from the veteran affairs side, I was just kind of wondering, have you seen that video that's been going around of the one guy who's kind of at his wit's end dealing with the VA?
Is it the guy who was complaining because his doctors keep getting changed and all that?
Yeah, he's like sitting in his car.
Yeah,
and
I saw it. That's not unusual.
It's not?
No, it's not unusual. Hate to tell you.
How can that be corrected? Is it the bureaucracy of it?
Well, part of the challenge is you have, at least from my view, there aren't enough mental health professionals to go around. And the ones that they do have a ton of patients. And then eventually what ends up happening, they transfer because they want a promotion or they retire, and that does impact the continuity of care. So that kind of creates a vacuum as far as care is concerned.
So, and not to fault any of them, but for their career advancement, unfortunately, they end up leaving a lot of patients just kind of floundering.
Yeah. I don't think in a lot of cases it's purposeful. When somebody retires, they retire. But I can tell you from my own experiences going to the VA as a patient, my care has been rotated to different care teams, depending on the circumstances, depending on if there is a contract, the CBOC here in Murrieta, which is where I get my care. They're a contract for the VA. So the continuity of care hasn't been stellar, but overall I've gotten great care at the VA. But I can't speak for other veterans.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing is, and again, I'm going to maybe sound a little naive. I'm assuming that everybody who gets into the care field, especially, the mental health aspect, I'm willing to bet probably 99.9% of them aren't intentionally wanting to leave their patients in a lurch, just kind of, oh shit, what do I do now? But as an organization, it's how do you, plan for each of those when they kind of pop up, unplanned, so to speak.
Yeah. I think it's difficult. You're talking about the largest healthcare system in the world. And I can imagine in a lot of cases, it's complex. The VA is a very complex organization.
Before we go deeper, let's kind of start back at the beginning. I'd like to learn a little bit more about you. Where's hometown for you?
So hometown is right here in Lake Elsinore. So I'm right up the road from you.
Born, raised, this is your area?
No. I was actually born and raised on the East Coast.
Okay.
I was born in New Jersey. My parents and I moved out here when I was roughly 7 years old. My dad took a job out here, which is what prompted our move from the East Coast to the West Coast.
What kind of work did your dad do?
He is an accountant by trade, and he's still plugging along at over 80 years old. He's still plugging along, so he loves what he does.
And your mom, does she work?
No, my mom is a former school teacher.
And what about brothers, sisters?
I am an only child.
Oh, another only brat like myself.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
So do you, coming out here from New Jersey at 7 years old, were you cognizant of the change? I mean, was it significant for you?
No, not really. Not in any real impactful way. You know, I'm just like, okay, we're moving, you know. And I think I was young enough to not really be impacted by it too much.
What was your life like as a young boy? What took up your time?
Playing with friends, goofing off on school, not doing my homework, you know, those kind of things, which made my mother, a former teacher, very, very happy, with that.
Was your mom ever your teacher?
No, but she did teach at the same school for a brief period in elementary. And what I will share about that is when I got in trouble, I didn't go to the principal. I didn't go to any of those folks. They took me to my mother, which I will tell you that when you're in trouble at school, at least when the bell rings at the end of the day, you go home and everything's, you know, whatever. No, when they take you to mom remembers. Mom definitely remembers, so I can imagine or remember a few times that I imagine my mom was not very happy with me.
The only third grader requesting a school change,
yes,
to another district.
Yes, please transfer me.
Growing up, did you active in sports or?
Yeah, I played soccer. I played baseball. I didn't really feel that, those were going to be like long-term things. I mean, my parents really tried to give me a lot of structure, you know, summer camp and, you know, again, was truly grateful for all of those things because I got to experience a lot of different things. I went to summer camp out of state in Arizona, got to go, you know, river rafting and horseback riding and do a lot of things that I probably would have not really had the opportunity to do. I had a pretty good childhood. I don't really have any complaints, to be honest.
What year did you graduate high school?
1989.
And what was your plan for your adulthood at that point in time?
Well, I didn't have one. When I got out of high school,
check.
Yeah. Well, you know, I did what a lot of people do. I started going to junior college. I went to Pierce College in the San Fernando Valley, which is where I grew up in the San Fernando Valley. And, you know, I didn't really have a lot in the way of a desire to do a lot of things. The one overarching thing I thought about initially was becoming a psychologist. And when my good friends will share with you that, yeah, that fits. But when I realized how much school was required, and since I wasn't, you know, I've just demonstrated I'm not a real good student, I thought, well, what else could I do? And that's when I sort of took a turn and started looking at law enforcement.
When did the military come on your radar?
You know, in the probably early 90s, there were a lot of hiring freezes, you probably remember. And at that point, there were a lot of agencies that while I was testing for a few, specifically LASD, LAPD, there were a lot of hiring freezes. And one day I was talking with my father and he goes, well, maybe I ought to think about the military. And I sort of chuckled because I was like, oh, shave my head and live with men. Oh, where do I sign? Right. I said, well, you know, let me go look. So I went down to the recruiter's office and initially, just like a lot of people, I'm thinking, I want to be a Navy SEAL. I did. And, without knowing much about it, to be honest with you. I saw a few commercials and I was like, that seems really cool. I want to do that. And I go down to the recruiter's office, and none of the recruiters there, with the exception of the Air Force recruiter. And he popped his head out. He goes, hey, who are you here for? And I said, well, I want to talk to the Navy recruiter. And he said, well, they're all out to lunch right now. And he goes, you don't need to listen to my spiel, but I'd be, give me a minute to share with you. Staff Sergeant Woolery was his name. I remember him to this day. And he, shared with me, tried to dig a little bit, find out what my interests were. And, I said, at this point I was, testing for some law enforcement agencies. And he goes, well, I got a job for you. And that was kind of all she wrote.
Prior to that, though, did you have anybody in your family or anybody close to you that had been in the military? Yeah,
my grandfather was a World War II vet. He spent time in both the Marines and the Army. My dad was in the National Guard. But my dad didn't really push me to go into the military because they were in the military. He just thought it offered an opportunity to me that, because at that point, everything was kind of stalled as far as my law enforcement career. And he said, well, this is another avenue. So he did what every good father does, is tries to prod me in the right way and let me make my own decisions.
And this is right before the first Gulf War, or had the first Gulf War already happened?
It had already happened. I joined the Air Force in 1993.
Okay. So from your parents' perspective, there wasn't that apprehension about, well, wait a minute, because prior to that, a lot of kids our age, it was all peacetime military service. Yep. No apprehension from your parents' side of it?
And until I let them know that I was getting deployed for a period to the Middle East in support of, my DD-214 says in support of Operation Desert Storm is when I enlisted, but I'm not a combat veteran. But was I deployed to a combat zone? Yeah. We were deployed to support operations in Saudi Arabia, in the Gulf there.
And what year was that?
94.
And when you went in, were you still thinking stopgap till you could become a cop on the civilian side? Or were you thinking long term?
Well, I went into the military and I became a security policeman for the Air Force. So I went in as law enforcement. There were, at the time, there were two sides. There was what they called security specialist and a law enforcement specialist. Security specialists, those folks would work out in like missile fields and things like that. Not an overly desirous gig. However,
is it more just like pulling guard duty?
Yeah.
Got it.
It's pulling aircraft security, nuke security, that kind of stuff. Whereas law enforcement specialist was more like your local law enforcement. You would make arrests and do all those kind of things. You would actively patrol the base. You would respond to alarms and pull over DUIs and all of that type of stuff. And that was great. But I realized that I knew I didn't want to stay in the military. I enjoyed it. But at the time, I just really had a yearning to get out and kind of.
So you knew basically as soon as you were in, it was time to get out.
Maybe about halfway, because I gave it a chance. And the one thing I do remember Staff Sergeant Woolery telling me very early on, he said, listen, basic training is not the Air Force. He goes, you're going to hate every minute of basic training. You're not going to like it. And just understand that's not the real Air Force. That's not how it is. And he was absolutely right. That's basic training is a snapshot in time. And I would suspect that a lot of the military services are very, very similar. Even though we call the Air Force the corporation, as it goes.
So 4 years total?
I did 4 years on active duty and 4 years in the reserves.
And when you were coming out, did you already start testing again for law enforcement?
Yes, I did. Started testing with different departments. I ended up getting hired by the U.S. Department of Energy at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. They were hiring for basically a full-time SRT team.
And with that, were you were a government employee, but not a member of the Air Force anymore, correct?
Yes.
And was your plan to stay federal law enforcement?
That's what ended up happening for the most part. I pretty much stayed in the federal realm for the better part of my career.
And getting to kind of fast forwarding near the end, you ultimately became the chief of police at a VA hospital here in the LA office.
Yeah, actually, the Long Beach VA. I did a little bit of time at the West LA VA. I was the acting chief of police there for a temporary period.
Going into that, or when you made the transition over to the VA, was your desire to promote?
You know, it's interesting. I get asked that a lot, and I just kind of followed my career path wherever it took me. I got to do a lot of really cool things in my career. But that sort of eventually took me up the ranks, if you will. But there was no real plan, to be honest. I just wanted to do the things that I enjoyed most. And if I was given an opportunity, kind of my rule was always say yes.
Chief of police for a VA hospital, is it for the chief for that one hospital, or is it for a region?
So there's kind of both, right? So at the time, and I know things have changed slightly with the VA, but at the time they had what they call the VISN chief position, and that was usually a collateral duty by a chief of police in a specific region. So I was in what they call VISN 22, which is the Veteran Integrated Service Network. 22, and that encompassed West LA, Long Beach, San Diego, Loma Linda, Phoenix, and Albuquerque. So that was our whole service network as far as healthcare. So each VA facility has its own chief, but then there's also, again, what they call the VISN chief, who sort of has technical oversight over a lot of those things. And at one point, I was asked to be the VISN lead, and you know, it was quite a challenge, to be honest. It was a challenge.
What was the biggest challenges for you?
Scope and magnitude. You know, we have some of the busiest and largest facilities in our network, and lots of activities. And, you know, when you're trying to split your time between working at your own VA, which we had a lot of activity. I had an amazing team, very progressive, very proactive. So I spent a lot of time dealing with our stuff, but also trying to get out to the other facilities, which in and of itself is a challenge.
For those not, and I'll throw myself in that, who are not fully aware of what the VA's law enforcement arm does, what are your duties? Our
job is to provide a safe and secure environment for patients, staff, you know, the doctors, the nurses, our admin staff. You know, we're a small city. So we have a basic academy that we go to in Little Rock, Arkansas. And then they also have some advanced training and some, advanced stuff. We're sworn federal law enforcement. You know, we can, enforce federal law. And depending on the jurisdiction at your facility, you can also enforce some aspects of state law.
And as we've talked about previously, so when did obviously you're working with the VA, so you're immediately immersed in the mental health aspect component, but when did you kind of start going down more? I don't want to necessarily call it a specialized route, because I want to get to the VMET team that you created or were part of creating. But was that your first foray into specifically mental health, or was there something before that?
No, I think there's a couple things. Having some friends that have died by suicide, having family members lost to suicide, over the course of years, you know, it has always been, you know, the mental health stuff has always been a bit of a fascination, and kind of going back to my high school when I was telling you my interest in being a psychologist, that was more of I just want to help people. And when I realized how much school there was, I was like, well, there's got to be other ways to help people where I don't have to go to as much school. And so I took a huge interest in it, for a variety of reasons. You know, number one, being a veteran, and also being a first responder and struggling with my own mental health issues over the years, and seeing firsthand how different mental health conditions impact our veterans, was very impactful. It just became it was really like a natural progression. I started to get further and further and further into the mental health stuff. And then, you know, you had my partner, Rich Bajorquez, on recently. I met with him. I met with now Commander Gannon of the LA County Sheriff's Department. He was over their mental evaluation team. And we just started dialoguing. And, it was kind of all she wrote.
Prior to that initial meeting of quite a few poignant members and you wanting to become more involved, was it something that you had the opportunity within the VA system as a law enforcement officer, or did you kind of have to forge your own new path in getting involved?
I would say it was kind of both, in a different aspect, and I'll clarify, of course. At the time, and still is, the Secretary of VA's first priority is to reduce the number of veterans that die by suicide every day. So it was kind of a no-brainer to go, okay, well, what are we doing and what aren't we doing as far as relation to that? But separate and distinct, I was invited to participate in what they call the Mayor's Challenge. And that was a partnership between VA and SAMHSA. And that was in early 2018 that myself, Commander Gannon, Dr. Berman, who is the Chief of Suicide Prevention at the West LA VA, she's the one that actually invited me to be on this group. And it was really a collaboration of city, county, federal, all the decision makers from LA. We all went for a policy summit in Washington, D.C., and we kind of all sat down and said, okay, well, what aren't we doing in relation to reducing or eliminating veteran suicide? And so it was kind of two separate paths. It was an interest, but then when I got invited to do this, I had the support of my medical center director and the leadership there. And that really allowed me to kind of start blazing my own path as far as developing new programs.
Were you already the chief at the time?
Yes.
Prior to that, what were some of the deficiencies or gaps that you were noticing that you were trying to fill, but maybe just kind of limited?
So as we connected, as I worked with my LA sheriffs and LAPD partners, we kind of sat back and said, okay, what as law enforcement, what aren't we doing right now? And there was some discovery made that there was a couple things. The first is the sheriffs and LAPD both have what they call a MET team, or MEU as LAPD calls it. And I know you're familiar with some of their programs, but that's their mental evaluation team, pairs a police officer, deputy sheriff with a mental health clinician, and they co-respond to mental health calls. And that's their whole job in life.
Not necessarily this veteran related, just
no.
All mental health.
Yeah, all mental health calls within the county and the city. And, these are very, what we would characterize as your very much community policing programs. And we slowly came to the conclusion that, hey, this is one thing the VA is not doing. And it was very, very interesting to me that, wow, we're not doing anything like this, and that kind of got me sparked up a little bit to say, hey, this could be impactful, because it was already making an impact in the community. And I said, well, why couldn't we gear something like this toward veterans? So as soon as we got back from that Mayor's Challenge Policy Summit, I went to work and really sat down with the bosses and basically leveraged the fact that the Secretary's number one priority is to reduce veteran suicide. This is another tool in that fight. So
am I understanding correctly then? Basically, your organization from the law enforcement standpoint went from reactive, we'll deal with it once they're at the hospital or in the system, to being proactive and getting out in the streets and trying to be a resource on the front end, so to speak.
That would be accurate. Even though that we would still get calls and, for service and, one would characterize that as being reactive. However, it was, and I'll quote Commander Gannon, he told me at one point, he said, Dave, we need you more than you need us as the Sheriff's Department. And he said that because LA County is home to the largest population of veterans anywhere in the country. So their call volume and the stuff that they're dealing with on a regular basis is through the roof. But a percentage of that demographic is veterans. And because of that, sometimes the deputies and clinicians didn't necessarily know how to make those connections with our veterans.
Did you find that once, I'll say your hospital, where you were operating out of, once you started making your changes and being more proactive, did it have a ripple effect and more of the other hospitals starting to adopt similar platforms?
So we started doing this mostly as a pilot program, and we did share, and our West LA folks also, and they have a pretty robust, and I'm sure Bojo talked a little bit about our relationship with the West LA VA and Captain Harris, and it's really come a long way. The programs look very different than they did before. We started from scratch. We basically, were, building up this program, and then one day it was just live. We just picked a date in August of 2018. I think it was August 20th, I believe. And I said, today's the day we're going live. And that's when we're going to start capturing data. And at that point, I didn't even know what data we needed to capture. I just said, start logging your calls for service and the types and all of those things. And that way we could at least show later on call volume, things like that. Because eventually I was only given one team, which, not complaining, the boss did ask me, Dave, how many teams you want? And I said, I want 4. I want to be able to cover 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He goes, well, you get 1. It's a pilot program. I said, Roger that. and I was grateful for that. And I was grateful they supported that effort at the local level. I think that those teams that have been out there are really making a difference.
I know one of the things that Bojo said that he's concerned that's prevented him from maybe retiring sooner, and he's starting to contemplate it, is that feeling of, if I step away, who's going to take over and keep this moving forward? Was that obviously a concern of yours?
Yes. And it became readily apparent after I left, because, whenever there's a change, and, whenever there's a change in the guard, so to speak, different chiefs come in with different priorities. And a lot of times your legacy or your legacy project isn't always at the top of mind for others. But there are plenty of people who have been able to continue the program on. So, and now, it's interesting. You kind of asked me, did other places adopt? I actually just saw a clinician advertisement in Ohio. They're hiring for these teams in Ohio. So it's slowly but surely spreading, which I think is really, really awesome.
From the growth perspective, did you find that, and I'm saying Washington in the sense of your big boss, did you find that Washington had eyes on this and really liked what was going on and wanted to try to push it forward? Or did you have kind of, I don't want to call it resistance, but just, did you really have to kind of push the train forward?
Well, I think I was pulling the train a lot, just in the sense of, the bosses are, I had many bosses, and the ones that were in Washington, D.C. were far removed. They knew what I was doing. I let them know every step of the way. They didn't provide any resistance, and I don't feel like they provided any resistance. But I guess I would have thought that people would have jumped on board a lot sooner. I didn't ever feel like I had a lack of support. It was just like, oh, okay, that's what you're doing. Okay, cool. That's great. Carry on. And I was like, okay, eventually I would have hoped that, and I think now it's sort of gathering a little bit of steam. What really threw everything for a wrench is the pandemic, because when I retired at the beginning of 2019 from law enforcement, and, the very following year, and prior to me leaving, I had put in requests to hire additional clinicians and things of that nature. I don't know if those ever got filled. But, then in 2020, the pandemic kicked off, and, that program kind of fell by the wayside, at least at the Long Beach VA, because they, everybody was kind of restricted at that point. And in a hospital environment, it becomes a much bigger task, especially when you're dealing with stuff like COVID.
Is the bigger issue from the VA's perspective, from what you experienced, getting our veterans to come to the VA and ask for help, or them coming and not being able to get the help?
Well, I think it's getting them there. And it really goes back to, and I have these conversations in some of the training classes because I get asked this a lot. Well, the VA does get a bad rap. I personally got good care. I know other veterans who get good care at the VA. And in reality, and I don't work for the VA anymore, but I don't think there's a better place. Now, not every veteran has that experience. And I think the negative experiences tend to, kind of continue to fester in a lot of different ways. And the other thing is that veterans, when they get out of the military, they don't necessarily go right into the VA. And there's nothing at this point that gets them purposefully into the VA for care. So a lot of times people will get out, USC did a study not too long ago. Well, actually it is a few years, but 80% of our veterans don't have a job. And I believe 34 or 35% have housing. So when they get out, they're focused on other aspects. And then what ends up happening is down the road, they fall into crisis. And then they try to reach out, or then they're trying to engage in their own care. And that's not every single veteran. But I think a good majority figure, well, I got this. I can handle it. I'm good. And I think we have that same challenge as first responders. Oh, I'm good. I got it. No worries. Right. Until you're not.
So is your advice then, as somebody's preparing to transition out, is even if you think you've got it, you think you're okay, at least establish that preliminary relationship with your local VA to get, I'll call it, on the books?
What I tell every single veteran, and what I say in general is these are benefits that you signed up and earned. Go get them, no matter what it is. And, you also have a small percentage of veterans. Well, I don't want to take, benefits away from another veteran. I've heard that. And I'm like, the VA's got billions of dollars. They got plenty for you. Or I'm good right now. I don't need it. Okay, well, that's great. And I hope you never need it. However, you should still sign up for your benefits no matter what. You earned those things. Why would you not want to take advantage of it? And even if you go into, for instance, if you get out of the military and go into a law enforcement agency or another job where you have healthcare benefits and all these things, that's great. Then you don't necessarily need your VA benefits, but you should still sign up for them and know that they're there just in case, because you never know what kind of situation you're going to find yourself in.
So let's transition to you personally. You retired in 2019. How soon were you planning for your retirement as far as what you were going to do afterwards?
Well, I would like to think probably at least 2 years. I'd sort of thought about it. And, when I finally promoted to chief of police, I was like, well, this is about as far as I'm going to go. I didn't see any other things that I could or would want to do at that point. I felt like I sort of achieved all the things I wanted to achieve. I was also just finishing up school, my bachelor's degree at the time. I told you I was a poor student. Well, I really took a shine to education much, much later in life. And
I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but now almost closing in on 100 guests, the common theme for a lot of us is we were not good in school, not because we were poor students, just we didn't apply ourselves. We didn't like it.
No.
And a lot of us found that we actually really enjoyed education, but not until we're about our 40s.
Yeah. I would say that's exactly right.
So you fit into the molds.
Yeah, absolutely. But I planned in the sense of, I took a look and, I kept thinking to myself, well, what would I want to do after retirement? And I had thought about, I think it was, probably about a year and a half out. I was like, I think I want to work for me for a change. I've dedicated a lot of my life to serving the public and doing those kind of things and serving others. And, but I wanted to do something for myself and do something that was interesting. Didn't even know if it was going to work or not. Still don't. It's always an evolving situation, but yeah, probably a good 2 years.
Did you have anybody that you were going to model yourself after when you first made the decision, I'm going to work for myself, of somebody to model yourself after as far as from a business perspective?
My father. My father is self-employed. And he did the same thing. And this is probably, I want to say 15 years ago now. He eventually left, corporate America, for lack of a better term, and started his own business. And he's been in business for himself for a long time. So, and it's great because my father and I have a lot in common in that aspect. However, I would say that my dad he thinks I take too many risks. And I know that he's only looking out for me as a dad would, but I tend to be a little bit more, hey, I'm not risk averse. I'll go out there and, hey, if it works, it works. It doesn't, at least then I know it doesn't work.
So to kind of hopscotch back and forth, the company that you created is Secure Measures.
Yes.
What is that company and what does it do?
So we are a public safety and private sector training and education firm. Our public safety training is really geared around the veteran culture or the veteran experience. And there's several different versions of that. We do training for public safety. We do training for private sector, educating, human resources managers, supervisors, what to do if you have a veteran employee that just fresh out, how to work with those folks, how to make them successful in those areas.
And when you focused on, did you know right away when you decided you were going to work for yourself that your company was going to be training based?
Well, I was doing some consulting in the beginning too. But over time, I have found that I really enjoy the training aspect of the business. So I think we made more of a conscious decision last year, to focus mostly on our training. And, that was also at the prodding of Rich and a few others, who said, hey, you have some really good stuff here. And I have to give Rich a shout out because the public safety training that we do, wouldn't have been possible without my partners at the LA County Sheriff's Department, without Rich, without Commander Gannon. None of that would have been possible.
Sticking with the consulting aspect. So for somebody, because we always hear this, oh, I'm a consultant. Having come from the military and law enforcement side of the house, retiring, and then putting on the consultant hat, what were you doing as a consultant? If somebody's thinking about, hey, I want to be a consultant, what is there to do?
So leveraging my experience in law enforcement and leveraging my experience, because not all of the VA policing has to do with policing. Some of it's physical security, especially if you're working at a VA, physical security is very important, or working on a military base. So as a result, I've been through tons and tons of different training as far as physical security, lighting and all those things. Well, those become important because there's a lot of organizations out there that are concerned about the security of their company, and need somebody to come in with some expertise and kind of say, hey, you should probably put lighting here. You should put an emergency phone here. You should probably put a panic alarm at the desk for your front desk staff. And it's really individualized, because everybody needs something different. But you're really kind of advising, you're basically an advisor for that company.
Did you have the company up and running before you retired?
No.
So literally I retired on Friday and started the company on Monday, or was there even a bigger gap than that?
Roughly. It was roughly like that. I gave myself the weekend. I knew I wanted to work for myself, but again, it was, there were a lot of unknowns and I didn't know where I wanted to go or what I wanted to do with things. So, I just kind of took my time, and got things formed and started putting together a website and all of that, all of those associated things that you would do for a business.
If you could go back and do it again, would you have kicked it off before you actually retired?
That's a hard question. in my role as the chief, I was incredibly busy, and and I'm busy now, and there'd be no way to juggle both. As much as I would have liked to lay some foundation, it would have been very, very difficult.
For somebody thinking about wanting to start their own company and going along this line of law enforcement training or consulting, now that you've experienced it, what are some of the big hurdles that you didn't anticipate that you had to get over?
Well, being a new small business, cash flow is always a problem. Clients don't always, they don't pay every 2 weeks. And it becomes a real challenge, especially when you're dealing with cities and counties and things like that. And I'm not saying anything negative. It's just, you submit your invoices and you get paid when you get paid. And, sometimes you have to do a lot of diligent follow-up and things like that. The other hurdle is, you can put your own website together, but in all honesty, enlist experts to put your stuff together. Your branding, all of those things are incredibly important as to your brand identity. Who are you? Because people have to eventually are going to associate that brand with you in particular. And you want to make sure that your brand and your brand awareness is consistent with that.
Speaking of brand awareness in 2023, and I know one of the big topics is, law enforcement officers and their use of social media and being on social media and the perceptions. What were some of your curated mindset as far as how you were going to portray your brand or what you were going to do or not do with your brand when you got going?
That's a good question. I think early on, like I said, I did what I could because there was a lot I didn't know. I'm very active on LinkedIn and on Instagram and those kind of things. As a matter of fact, at the very beginning, I don't even think I had my Instagram up and running. But it was mostly on LinkedIn. I felt that was where my demographic was. That's where I was going to find collaborators, partners, clients, all of those kind of things. So I really, I would write articles. I would find compelling stories and I would comment on them and do all the things that they kind of, common best practices they share with you. But then eventually you start meeting people and they share. What I always tell people is find a mentor, find somebody who's going to help you navigate some of these things, and find a trusted advisor, not just anybody, but, go to your network and say, who do you know that does this? And find that person and seek them out.
It's funny you mentioned that because that was going to be my question. I know you said you were modeling yourself after your dad as far as being a businessman and a business owner, but who did you ultimately get yourself a mentor?
Well, interestingly enough, I joined a program called Bunker Labs. And I don't know if you're familiar with Bunker Labs, but they have what they call, they are a veteran nonprofit that helps veteran entrepreneurs kind of get their businesses off the ground. And they have what they call a veteran in residence program. And I was accepted into the program here in Los Angeles. And basically you meet and you mastermind with other entrepreneurs. And they have mentors in the group that help you and get you connected to the right resources, getting you connected to the people that can help you with branding and marketing and handling your finances and all of those different aspects of running a business, which was a game changer in my view, because now you're in an ecosystem where everybody's a veteran or a veteran family member. And you're all entrepreneurs and you're all at varying stages. But they also gave us free WeWork space so we could kind of work. And that was hugely helpful, hugely. There are a ton of benefits to a program like that. So I also tell people seek out those type of mastermind groups because those folks are going to force you to up level.
Did you have to have your business up and running to join that group? Or could you be somebody who's thinking about getting a business going?
Thinking. You can have both. They have several scalable programs. Like once your business is at a certain level as well, they have something called CEO Circle, which is, I think that's sponsored by JP Morgan Chase. Like it's a bigger mastermind. And then they had some entry level programs that kind of got you into the mindset of, here are some things you need to think about as a potential business owner. And, you would take these trainings and they would kind of highlight, here's what it's going to take for you to start. So yeah, I mean, it kind of runs the gamut, their programming.
Is Bunker Labs specifically for veterans, so you have to be a veteran to join their group?
Yeah, well, or a veteran family member. I mean, it's really targeting the veteran community.
And is it in-person training, or is it, online Zoom Teams type deal?
So I got accepted like right in the middle of the pandemic. So we did a few in-persons, but most of it was virtual, which actually worked out pretty well for a lot of people because that gave us a lot more flexibility. Because we would have to meet once a week and we would have had to meet in downtown LA once a week. And that would have been
super convenient.
Yeah. Super convenient. Right. At 5 o'clock or whenever in the afternoon. So the fact that it was virtual made it a lot easier. And because, everybody's moving at 100 miles an hour in their business, it made it a little bit easier for us to do it that way.
And how long is their program?
So that is a 6-month program. And you have the ability to kind of re-up for the next cohort. So I stayed on for 3 cohorts, just because I enjoyed the ecosystem. I still talk to people from it. Everybody's kind of gone their separate ways and doing their thing. But it was incredibly beneficial.
Do they then give you the opportunity to come back and be a mentor to incoming students?
Yes. In the last cohort, I was what they call the city ambassador, which is really you're helping facilitate conversations. You're giving people the wisdom of your expertise in some cases, or I would say more of the wisdom of your experience. Saying, yeah, I wouldn't do that if I were you, because I did that and it didn't work out well for me, but here's some suggestions. And then guiding people towards resources. We would try to curate lists of vetted resources for our veteran entrepreneurs. So they, the whole point is to ensure they're successful.
Would you have started this before you retired if you were doing it over again?
100%. Yeah. Because I think that would have helped provide a little bit of a softer landing in some cases. But I would also say that doing things on your own forces you to be resourceful and forces you to find a way. And it also tests your passion for what you're doing, because there have been plenty of days where I would wake up in the morning and I'm like, why am I doing this? And I know why, because I have a true passion for it. But those are the things that are going to get you through the day. Whereas motivation won't. Motivation is just motivation. Motivation comes and goes.
Right.
But if you have a true passion for something, that doesn't go away.
And so now transitioning over to the training side of it, what specific type of training do you offer?
So kind of going back to the public safety training. So we have 2 different classes right now that we teach for our public safety partners. Again, Rich had a huge hand in that stuff in developing that information. And basically we have what we call is I'm sort of in the process of renaming some classes, but we call it Understanding the Veteran Experience for Public Safety. And our first class is really kind of your basic 101, laying the foundations of this is the military culture. This is the language. This is some things you need to look at. These are some common mental health conditions. These are, the statistics for current rates of suicide within the veteran community. And we really kind of pull everything together and kind of give people that basic experience. And then the second class does a much deeper dive into the mental health conditions, like really understanding the underpinnings of post-traumatic stress, how that impacts people, why people struggle, and talking about the different aspects of folks transitioning. And we also pull in guest speakers that come in and combat vets that will come in and talk about their experiences, in particular with law enforcement, to let them know, kind of sharing, like, here are some ways that would have been helpful for me if this situation were handled this way. and I have folks who have had both positive and negative experiences that happily come in, and they're not trying to poke anybody in the chest. It's really kind of saying like, and the sense I get from a lot of these folks is it really boils down to attitude in a lot of cases. But our guest speakers are amazing, and they really do a great job in sharing those aspects.
Well, and going back to what you said earlier, unfortunately, and this is just across the board, we tend to be more vocal about the stuff that irritated us or made us mad. I mean, the joke being, think of most of the Yelp reviews. It's people who've taken the time to give a bad Yelp review more than the people who said, hey, there was it almost seems like if everything went well, everybody just kind of keeps their mouth shut.
Yeah.
And so with you being able to present people who have had both sides of that experience, I think that furthers the learning process in, hey, this worked for me and this didn't work for me.
Yeah. And, the other thing I really like about our guest speakers is they realize that in the situations that, they either got arrested or encountered law enforcement, they own it. They own their situation, which makes it it's not like, well, I didn't deserve this treatment because I didn't really do anything wrong. It's, oh, I was absolutely wrong in what I did. But I didn't deserve to be treated the way I was treated. So they own it, but but that tends to be one of the more commented portion of our classes. When people leave reviews, they're like, yeah, we love the guest speaker. They really get a lot out of that.
The classes are one day, multiple days.
So yeah, these are 8-hour classes. We typically end the day using our simulator to run people through Milo scenarios, where they have to kind of use what we gave them in class and kind of use that in kind of a simulation of the training.
Are you getting any type of or working towards any type of post certifications?
So both classes, and I have a third one in development. Both classes are California Post certified, as well as Arizona Post, and also STC here in California.
And are you taking the classes on the road, or do people have to come to Southern California?
I have taken them on the road. We're in Boston in September. I was up in Folsom in February. We've been slowly but surely getting these things out there.
Two last questions. I want to go back to giving you the opportunity to give veterans specifically advice from engaging with the VA from your experience working there. And then I would like to give you the opportunity of just anybody thinking about starting their business, something else to be mindful of.
So what I would say to any veteran, especially folks that are just getting out of the military, or even anybody in the military, start planning for the end, almost at the beginning, in the sense that it's a process. And one of the other things I would share is, for folks getting out, pay attention in your TAPS briefing, your transition assistance program. Every military service has a transition assistance program. And the general consensus I get from talking to a lot of veterans is nobody pays attention to any of those briefings. They're ineffective. Almost every veteran I talk to, and I ask, when I come across veterans in our classes or some of the events I go to, when I have conversations, a lot of them are like, yeah, it wasn't effective. Either I was just back from a deployment, and I went through this briefing, and they're dealing with, I want to go home, I'm dealing with mental health issues, or I'm dealing with a lot of different things. I want to see my family. They're not really engaged and they're not really paying attention. Now, there's a lot of good information there, and you're going to miss it if you're not paying attention. So number one, pay attention before you get out, because you may need that information later. And in some cases, some veterans do. They do need that. So pay attention to that, but also start planning, give yourself a purpose on the way out the door. What do I want to do? Now that I'm not in the military anymore, what is my purpose? What is my plan? But giving yourself that purpose will allow you to kind of dive into something more, in my view, more positive than being stuck in an echo chamber and being like, I'm just going to sit around and drink and all this other stuff. Not that I'm opposed to a good glass of whiskey, but if that's all you're doing, that could be problematic.
Well, the one thing that I routinely hear is you've got to find that you've got to find that new mission.
Yeah.
If you don't have that mission set to prepare for, to plan for, to operate in, like you said, you find yourself just kind of sitting around going, okay, now what?
You need to be self-motivated to figure that out and to go after whatever it is. And again, if you're start thinking about what you want to do. Well, if I want to go work in corporate America, I'm going to go start looking at, what are the requirements for the job, how to write a resume, all of those things, and figuring out how the skills you've earned in the military relate to the job that you're trying to get is also very, very helpful.
And any last piece of advice for somebody starting their own business?
Definitely get a mentor. There are plenty of business programs out there, kind of like mastermind programs. I would really take a look at what some of those are offering. Again, like Bunker Labs, that's free for veterans. So if you're starting a veteran-owned business, I would highly recommend Bunker Labs. I had a really great experience, and I know a lot of other veterans do too. But I would definitely get a mentor, somebody that you trust or somebody that could be trusted to guide you in the right way. And the other thing too is understanding your market, understanding, is there a market for whatever product or service that you're going to provide? Is it there? Because I know a lot of people who have great ideas, but maybe now is not the time for that particular thing. Really understanding your market, and then really understanding social media. That can be a big blind spot for folks. Oh, I just post stuff on, I just post. Well, there's a methodology, in some cases, or I've found there's a rhythm, and there's the algorithms, and you have to really think about what is the messaging you're putting out there and how is that consistent with your brand and all of those type of things. So getting a mentor and sitting down and really kind of driving home, well, what are the things I need to do versus the things I want to do?
Speaking of the social media postings, have you sourced that out, or are you staying on top of it yourself?
I'm going to say I attempt to stay on top of it myself. And it's one of those things where, like, if I'm going to spend the whole day teaching, sometimes I don't have time to post anything, and my father always affectionately says, well, when you're out teaching, you're not selling, and when you're selling, you're not teaching. So you're in that quandary. But eventually we'll get to the point, I think, where we'll be able to hire some additional instructors to go out and start teaching, which will free up some resources to do those things.
If somebody's interested in working with you as an instructor, can they reach out to you?
100%.
What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Dave@secure-measures.com. Just email me. Happy to chat with people. We're still in the process of kind of ramping up. I would argue an ideal candidate would be both a veteran and a former first responder, or vice versa, because living in both of those worlds gives you that unique perspective, and it's easy to share those experiences if you've had them.
I appreciate your time, and I wish you the best of luck growing your company.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Paul.
I appreciate you watching. But before you go, if you like the video, please hit that subscribe button. Also, any comments are appreciated. Thank you.